Hello and welcome to another edition of Conversations with Kevin Chrisom on Milton Access Television. I am your host, Kevin Chrisom, and today we'll sit down with Milton's Town Administrator, Nicholas Milano, to discuss his career in local and state government, many of the current issues that face our town, as well as his thoughts on the future outlook of Milton, and much more. Our show starts now, so let's go have a conversation. Hello, my friends, and thank you for joining us here on Conversations on Milton Access TV. Well, with stints at the State House, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, Marlborough City Hall, and Medfield Town Hall, there was no doubt that when Nick Milano was hired to be Milton's next town administrator just over 2 years ago, he would bring with him a wealth of both local and state government experience necessary to effectively oversee the day-to-day operations of Milton. And from issues and efforts such as traffic mitigation, affordable housing, new school construction, potential overrides, and of course a high-profile court case pertaining to Milton's opposition to the MBTA Communities Act, there never seems to be a dull moment here in the 02186. And with me to discuss all this is the man who is tasked with dealing with those aforementioned issues and much more, Town Administrator Nick Milano. Nick, thanks so much for joining us here on Conversations today.
Sure, thank you for having me.
Good to have you. You've been in the job now for just over 2 years. A couple of words to describe your time so far here in Milton.
Sure, it's been busy, but we like that. So it keeps the day moving and keeps things going. A lot has been going on the past couple of years. At the beginning it was just about kind of getting the lay of the land, getting to know everybody, getting to understand the issues. Since then we're trying to put, try to wrap some things up, keep things rolling, and get some things accomplished.
So as I mentioned in the outset, you have a lot of local and state government experience already in your professional career. What's something that drove you to Milton to come here to be town administrator?
Well, I had been working in local government. I was in Marlborough for 4 years, working as the chief of staff to the mayor. I did 3 years as the assistant town administrator in Medfield, and I always had the interest of taking that next step to be the town administrator. But I think what was important to me was finding a community that I felt comfortable in, that I knew and understood, and was interested in working in. And for us, Milton was the right fit. We live in Boston. My wife grew up here in town. My in-laws are still here in town. So we spent a lot of time here in Milton anyway. So I felt it was the right fit. A lot of the same issues you'll see from town to town. But it's about finding the right fit in terms of a community that was important to me. And we were happy with the decision and the way everything worked out.
What are some things that surprised you the most so far in your 2 years here?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's always the issues you don't necessarily see as becoming big that take up so much of your time. The MBTA communities thing, when I was in Medfield, it was an issue, but it was a much of a smaller impact there. Right. And once I got into Milton and got my feet under me and we understood what the ramifications were, it was a little bit of a bigger issue there in terms of number of housing units and percent of housing of the town. So that's just an example of a state policy that affected two towns differently and the headaches that transpired from there.
Right. What's the status right now of the MBTA Communities lawsuit?
Sure. We had oral arguments in October at the Supreme Judicial Court, and now all parties are waiting for a decision from the court. So the court has a timeline where they can give a decision by. So it should be any day, really, but they have up until 130 days after the oral arguments to issue their decision. Of
course, we had the referendum in February and the town meeting vote a few months prior to that in December. What was that like for you, sort of in the behind the scenes, watching that play out in a town role?
Yeah, I think what's interesting and what I think is important about town administrator jobs in particular is that we are executing the policy choices of the select board. And for us, that is something that had changed. Perspectives on the issue had changed over time. So what we were implementing changed slightly over time as well. In terms of the referendum vote and the town meeting question, I think the most interesting part of it was really the background procedural stuff, because it was a charter provision that was in the town's charter but hadn't been exercised in 50 years. So it was about diving into the charter, understanding state laws around elections. For example, the charter said the election had to happen within 21 days, but state law requires that elections happen only 35 days after the town clerk is given the ballot question. So there's these conflicts that we had to work through. And of course, the worst headache of all was that there was a big blizzard predicted for the day of the election.
It didn't turn out to be true.
No. So we went to court to change the day of the election, and then it was a beautiful day for an election.
I know.
So these
certainly
are the things
was.
that you get.
And a high turnout, too.
That's right.
In an election that was never supposed to really happen, which is amazing. But and you even driving around town that day, seeing all the news coverage. Did you get a lot of requests for news coverage? And obviously, it's not your role as a town administrator to be on the front lines here, but did people come out and try to get you on record and comment and things like that?
Yes, we got certain requests, and I think the other thing that we get that we try to help with is if reporters have questions and they don't fully understand the issue and what it means, we try to help with them prior to any news coverage, hopefully to make sure they understand the issue fully.
Sure. Well, we'll see what's going to happen, and who knows, by the time this episode airs, we may have a ruling, but not today, as we joked before. But I want to talk a little bit about recruitment and retention in Town Hall. Obviously, you've been in this position now for 2 years, and Milton is often competing with other towns for great talent and vice versa as well. When you walk into Town Hall every day, what's your main goal on keeping some of these employees, whether they've been here for a year, whether they've been here for 15 years, here for a long time, working in Town Hall in the town of Milton? Yeah,
no, that's a great question. I think, being competitive and being close to where your peers are in terms of salary and compensation is always important. Milton's in kind of a unique position where we're surrounded by Boston and Quincy, and we really can't compete with those communities. But in terms of our peers in Norfolk County, we feel we're in good shape on those fronts. I think it's more about the second half of that, which is the recruitment piece, because there are great jobs in local government, but people I just don't think are really used to that idea. Municipal finance officials, whether it's the appraiser, the finance director, those jobs, there are fewer people entering those fields. So for municipalities around Massachusetts, the question really is how are we going to replace that workforce as people start to age out? And then on the retention front, it's about giving folks the bandwidth to do their job, staying out of their way, not micromanage, and make sure that they feel welcome and part of the town. We try to do that.
How do you make Milton become a destination over someone who wants to go explore Western Mass and work out there or work in the city, as you mentioned? Is there anything that Milton offers in your mind that's unique to perhaps other communities? What's the selling point in your mind, if there is one?
I think the challenges that we face are, I think what's nice about a town the size of Milton and the location of us is we're not a huge kind of faceless entity like a city of Boston might be or a city of Quincy might be. You go into some of these offices and there's 2, maybe 3 employees, so it's that face-to-face personal interaction that I think is important. It's a little unusual compared to some of our neighboring communities, just based on geography alone.
What's morale like at Town Hall? Departments?
I think it's good. I hope to think it's good. We've had a great transition in human resources where Carla Feedy has stepped in, Milton resident, lifelong Milton resident, who has stepped in and done a great job in terms of embracing culture and connecting with folks on a different way.
That's great. Well, we hear great things that go on in Town Hall, and it's the unsung heroes too in all departments, and that starts at the top. So
definitely
some good stuff there. Want to talk a little bit about traffic mitigation. What's going on in terms of the Traffic Commission just met recently, the Franklin Street issue on making it a one-way. Talk a little bit about that, especially for the East Milton neighbors.
Sure. These are kind of some of the challenging issues that we face where we have control over such a small piece of the problems that cause our traffic issues in Milton. We can't stop people from entering the town. I think the way the state sets up a lot of its highway system is they're pushing traffic into Milton. So it presents these congestion issues that there's really, unfortunately, not a lot that we can do without a regional approach. In terms of East Milton specifically, there has been talk for a long time about ways to make a dedicated loading zone work in East Milton, and talk about making Franklin a one-way away from Adams towards Bassett, as anybody traveling up Franklin towards Adams, the only way you're supposed to go is really right. So there shouldn't be necessarily a ton of traffic demand for that movement. So as a way to try to get a loading zone, create some more space on that portion of the street. And we have to start thinking about the East Milton 40B project that's coming down around the corner, which will be a 6-story structure, 92 units, and will require significant amount of truck traffic coming through the neighborhood. So part of the conversation also was saying, okay, what can we do to get the trucks in and out as quickly and seamlessly as possible, and having that as a one-way might help that. Traffic Commission didn't make any final recommendation on that. It's still an issue we need to do a little more homework on, but it's about a loading zone. It's about managing that truck traffic a little bit better than we might be able to do otherwise.
A lot of folks that have been here their whole life have been often remarked they're surprised that Milton has become a destination for fine dining. A lot of great restaurants have propped up in Milton, particularly in East Milton Square and in the Central Ave Business District. Obviously, one they're looking at upstairs at the Fruit Center. What can you tell us about the status of that issue going on?
Sure. So the owner of Novara and Abbey Park is looking to open an additional restaurant next to the Fruit Center where the Plate had vacated the space there. So, I think from a big picture perspective, we certainly don't want empty businesses. And second floor retail is really hard. And I think if you talk to folks who are up there, you need a reason to bring people into that building. So having that space activated and used is a benefit. Remains to be seen what the final answer will be there. I believe that they were planning to try to come back to the planning board to get approval to open that restaurant. They were before the planning board, pulled back, and I think the intention is to come back. But still waiting some news on that.
Interesting. What's your position on talking to neighbors, making sure that neighbors are also in any issue? I often say that neighborhoods make this great town, and making sure that neighbors are fully aware of what's going on, projects, whether it's housing, whether it's restaurants and things like that. Does the town take a transparent, active approach in making sure neighbors and neighborhoods are at the process, at the table?
We certainly try to. I think the planning board in particular has been trying to reach out to folks. I think it's kind of a two-way street there where we need to do a good job of reaching out to folks. Not everybody has the time to attend a meeting at 7 o'clock on a weeknight. I have 3 children myself, so I know what that's like when I'm not home because I'm at a work meeting. So, it's about giving people ways to participate without making the expectation only being if you come to a meeting and you meet with us. I mean, my view is I have an open door policy. Folks are in town hall. They're very welcome to step by. It's kind of a metaphor, but it's kind of not. But when I had started, folks had been in the town administrator's office. When you walked in, there was a wall kind of blocking off half of the office. So when I was sitting at my desk, I couldn't see who was coming in the office. And when people were out, I would have to come out to see what was going on. And it just didn't make a good feel, I didn't think. So we literally removed that partition to try to make it easier for me to see who was coming and going, so I could jump up if needed. But that was kind of one of the early things that we did, and I think we try to hold true to that. Idea.
Well, we have some tremendous neighborhood groups, and as you well know. We'll get off the issue of planning in a minute, but I also want to talk quickly about the vacant position for the planning director and community development. What's the status on that?
Yeah, thank you. So anybody who's interested in being a town planner, please let us know. We're open for interviews. We had a few applicants and we conducted some interviews, but at this point we just we didn't have anybody who had a real planning experience coming from another city or town, or really that hands-on knowledge of Chapter 48, which is the Zoning Act, and other portions of the job that are critical. So we plan to renew that search in the new year, get through the holiday season, repost it, and try to attract somebody to the position. With all the headlines around MBTA communities, the planning profession is one that obviously deals so closely with housing, so that might have a little bit of a dampening effect on interest in Milton at the time, while there's so much ambiguity about what the next steps will be. So perhaps between starting fresh in the new year, having some clarity about MBTA communities, that might be able to help us work towards that. We're very lucky to have Cheyenne Frazier, who's our assistant planner, who has been with us for a few months now, who's doing a great job in the absence, but it was a 3-person office, now it's down to a 2-person office. So we would like to get that office back up to full staffing. So again, if folks have anybody who they know might be interested, please send them our way, and we're happy to chat with them.
Sure, that's good to know. Now, obviously, you talk with your department heads on a daily basis. I want to talk about other communities. What's your relationship like with other town administrators and city managers as well?
Sure.
Particularly here in the South Shore region, our neighbors.
So we're lucky that we're in Norfolk County, because the Norfolk County has a very active group of managers, the Norfolk managers as we refer to ourselves. We meet monthly. I hosted the group back in February, I think. We were over at Cunningham Hall, but we sit down monthly just to chat about what's going on, hot button issues, budget issues, and that's really helpful because people think differently about things, to be able to probe their minds and probe their approaches to different issues is always helpful. The Mass Municipal Association is the statewide organization, and there's a municipal managers network in that. But I think a lot of what we get out of those relationships really delves out of the Norfolk Managers Group.
Sure. obviously each town has their own issues, but the national issues such as workforce housing, affordable housing, things like that, we're all affected by that as well. Let's talk a little bit about Milton's state of the economy. How are we doing when we, the budgets, and let's talk too about potential overrides as well coming up.
Yes.
Always fun.
It is. So, and communities such as this, I think everybody gets it. 95% of our revenue comes from residential taxpayers. There just isn't a big commercial tax base. So we know that those tax increases are felt directly by residents. Some of the communities, Boston and Quincy in particular, around us, but also Dedham, they're able to shift more of that burden to commercial taxpayers, and they also have a bigger pie with which they can support their budgets. So Milton has not had an operating override since calendar year 27 for fiscal year 2018. That's a long time to go without operating overrides in a world where we're allowed to raise our tax levy by about 2.5% a year plus new growth. So that's a limited cap on the amount of revenue the town can bring every year. So it's kind of a cyclical nature. I think one of the things that got us past the past couple of years was the infusion of federal funds through the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA money, and also funding that went directly to schools through the ESSER program. Those two sources of funding helped invest in things in Milton, helped us meet our balanced budget requirements, helped us do a lot of exciting capital projects we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. However, those funds have dried up. So right now, looking at fiscal year 26, which is our next budget year, we will need to embrace some significant reductions in folks' budget requests, or seek an operating override to make that balanced budget work for fiscal 26. We're still kind of at somewhat of an earlier phase of the budget process, but what is clear is we face two roads, which is we can bring forward an operating override that's sensible to voters, or we can embrace some budget reductions, which will have significant impacts for schools and for town departments. The other thing I'll just mention in terms of the budget is, since our revenue options are limited, other than doing operating overrides or reducing services, the third option for the town to consider is additional ways to think about growth. What opportunities are there where growth is acceptable and would deliver net value adds to the town that would help the budget picture? We have a grant of about $100,000 to do an economic development study with MAPC under the planning board. So that work is commencing now. So that'll be the question that study is asking. What do folks think is missing from a business and commercial perspective in town? Where do folks think that should be if it is missing? And how do we go about putting that into place if that is the case? And it's meant to be driven from public engagement, public support.
So departments are expecting to have a bit of a reduction in their budgets, perhaps?
Without an operating override,
Without
correct.
the operating override, sure. We've got about 10 minutes left in our program. I want to talk about the news recently that came out regarding the new school project. And as we mentioned, you have some experience working with the Massachusetts School Building Authority. Let's talk to the folks about what the news was and what also the Massachusetts School Building Authority is, because I think a lot of people don't know what that entity is. So if you want to explain a little bit about that.
Of course. So the Mass School Building Authority, MSBA by its acronyms, is a state entity that reimburses cities and towns for school projects. Your reimbursement rate is based on a number of factors, primarily community income and demographics. So you apply to the MSBA. If you're accepted into the program, you have to abide by their rules and go through their process. But at the end of the day, you can get reimbursed for a fixed percentage of the project costs. For Milton, that reimbursement rate is about 45%. On Friday, December 13th, so this past Friday, the MSBA Board of Directors voted to invite Milton into the program. The first step of that program is referred to as eligibility period, where you have to do some preliminary checklist of action items that the MSBA gives the town. But then you're invited into the feasibility study program, where you get an owner's project manager, you get an architect, and you start working on a school project. So for Milton, that means a little bit of a step back in the sense that the MSBA process requires studying the school that we submitted for, which is the Cunningham School. So there'll be some study of that building. It also allows for study of new options. It's thinking about from educational planning perspectives, enrollment perspectives. So it's a bit of a pause on the progress that's been made to date, and a bit of a step back in terms of taking a bigger taking a reset and starting over fresh with a new design team and a new owner's project manager.
What would you expect the articles to be at town meeting regarding this, the special town meeting in February?
Yep, there's a special town meeting on February 24th, so I think I would expect perhaps 2 articles related to it. The first is the town needs funding to engage in the feasibility study, which is where it does a preliminary design of a project and progresses that design further with its consultant team. And then the school building committee was set up by town meeting in 2019.
Right.
It has a 9-member group. The MSBA has certain requirements for what a school building committee must have on it. So that school building committee will need to be amended, adjusted to reflect some of the requirements from the MSBA program. Like, for example, I'm supposed to be on it. So.
And you're not on it currently?
I'm not on it currently, and I think usually what they'll do is cities and towns will put the administrator on as a non-voting member to satisfy the MSBA requirements. So those are the kinds of changes that we expect to see in February.
Now, the moderator appoints the school building committee. Will the moderator continue to appoint this new look of a committee, or is that still to be determined?
I think we'd have to see how that article takes shape. I think the intention is to expand upon the existing committee rather than starting over.
Very good. What else are we expecting on February 24th, the town meeting as well?
Sure.
And some news for our seniors potentially as well, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So while we were thinking about the operating override as well as the school project, we're trying to be mindful of ways to potentially seek other sources of revenue, hence the economic development study that I referred to earlier. But also, secondly, think about ways that we can mitigate some of these tax increases that we expect to happen from those who are seniors and maybe on fixed incomes.
Right.
So one thing that other cities and towns do is they implement a means-tested property tax exemption. So for seniors who, in Massachusetts, there's what's called the senior circuit breaker tax credit. So it's based on your personal income that you submit to the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, and it's a state tax credit. So the way that the local version of it works is that if you applied for and received the state tax credit, we will apply it in Milton as well to property taxes. So it's not a new application. It's a new application process in the sense you got to give us the same materials, but it's not a new program for staff to try to figure out. It's not that Milton Town Hall staff are determining who's eligible and who's not. We're taking the existing income requirements and guidelines, and depending on what was received through that, matching that at a certain percentage locally. So try to keep it a little more streamlined and easier for people to understand and work through.
Well, Milton has, as you know, a thriving senior population with the Milton Council on Aging. Of course, our great organizations, Fuller Village, Winter Valley, Home Inc., among others, and especially the folks that still live in their homes. So anything to help them, I think that would be a good thing.
No, agreed. And then in terms of other articles, we're working on some articles related to lead services. So lead services, service lines are the water lines that connect a property to the line in the street. Historically, 50, 60 years ago, they were made of lead, and there's a federal requirement that get removed. So we're working on some articles related to funding further study of where our lead lines are and funding some removal of those. We have 2 articles related to actually alcohol. One is related to allowing consumption sales to take place on city and town property. For example, can the library have a wine night where they bring some kind of program and allow that, as well as whether it's the Council on Aging. So right now it's a blanket prohibition. We're seeking to change the bylaws to allow it with approval of an entity that controls a building, such as the library trustees in the case of the library, and the select board. The other example is sometimes we have events down at Manning Park, and right now it would be a blanket prohibition technically in place. So change that slightly from alcohol. We also are in a kind of a funny position with liquor licenses, where a restaurant seeking a liquor license requires approval of both town meeting and the legislature. However, if you want to open a package store in Milton, all you have to do is go to the select board to get a license. So it's because we don't have any licenses for restaurants technically. So we're seeking a special act that would give Milton a set amount, 5 licenses, to be issued to restaurants without requiring a prospective business owner to go to town meeting, to go to the legislature, and come back to the select board, a process that can take a year, 2 years. And if you're a small business owner, that's not a realistic timeline
Certainly
for you.
is not. Certainly is not. So a lot to be on the docket for this upcoming special town meeting on February the 24th. Final few minutes here on the show, and again, thanks for joining us here. It was a great conversation. What's on the horizon for you in terms of what you still want to accomplish here in this town? You've only been in for more than just about 2 years now, but still a long way to go. What do you hope to achieve in the next couple of years here?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's about wrapping up some of the bigger capital projects we have. The animal shelter is nearing completion. We completed a new fire headquarters behind Town Hall.
Looks great.
Yeah.
Yep.
However, there are 2 more fire station projects that are meant to come from that.
Right.
East Milton project is out for bid now, and then the town will turn to Atherton. So making sure those projects finish and we get resolution on those 3 projects. One thing that was discussed was figuring out how to set up the DPW yard, make some improvements and investment down at the DPW yard. That has fallen off the radar only in a sense because the fire station projects were approved, but that remains a big question: is how are we going to invest in the DPW yard to make sure we have the garage space, the base space, the equipment that we need to take care of the town's infrastructure more broadly, and continue to build in some succession planning in our departments. So ensuring that we have pathways to transition as people start to, whether they seek newer and better opportunities elsewhere,
Right.
God forbid, or they seek retirement. These happen, and make sure that we have plans around succession so that there's continuity in operations moving forward.
Exciting times ahead, no doubt about it. Well, thanks for joining us here. We look forward to all the very interesting things we mentioned. There's never a dull moment in your life, correct? Would that be true? Do you ever get a break?
Yes.
You ever get a break?
Well, I had a new baby about
That's right.
2.5 months ago, so that has added a little new
Congratulations.
dynamic at us. So there's 3 of us. There's 3 kids running around the house these days, or in the house, I should say.
You got your hands full, both at home and in the workplace too. What's the best way for folks to get in touch with you if they have a question or want to join a local board or committee as well?
No, if folks are interested or have any questions, they can reach out. Phone 617-898-4845 is my office. Email, first initial last name, nmilano@townofmilton.gov. And obviously we're in Town Hall most hours of the week, so feel free to stop by and say hello.
Well, it's a great town and with great people. As someone who has lived here my whole life, and we have some great people who work in Town Hall, as you see every day, and starts at the top. So congratulations on a job well done. As they say, keep it going.
Thank you very much.
Come back and visit us anytime.
Of course.
My thanks to all of you for joining us for this edition of Conversations. And as a reminder, you may watch any episode of Conversations online, miltonaccesstv.org, or on our MATV YouTube page. Stay tuned for another edition of the show, but until then, for all of us here at Milton Access Television, I'm Kevin Chrisom. Thank you for watching, and take care.
Three, two, one.
Here we go!